Hi everyone. So yesterday we went over 3 super simple activities that prepare your child to button and unbutton. Today we're going to go over actually teaching your child how to button. So before we get started, I just want to talk about some of the skills that are going to be challenged. Since buttons are small, obviously this will be challenging our kids' fine motor skills or the coordination in their fingertips and the small muscles of their hand. It's also going to be challenging their bilateral coordination or the ability of both sides of their body to work together. It's going to be challenging their motor planning and sequencing skills because they're going to have to know the steps of how to button, as well as their hand strength because they're going to have to push the button through the hole. So before we get started, I also want to talk about some quick tips. So ideally, we would be using big buttons. Big buttons are easier to hold on to for our kids, so it's not as much of a challenge on the fine motor skills. We also want to start teaching them how to unbutton before we teach them how to button, because unbuttoning is easier. We want to use consistent verbal cues when we're going over the steps of buttoning, so we want to say the same things over and over again to reinforce the same exact actions and to reinforce that muscle memory. We also want to button and unbutton with a shirt that's on the table as opposed to teaching our child how to do it while it's on their body because that's much more difficult. And lastly, if you have an old shirt that has kind of smaller holes, feel free to cut them to make them a little bit bigger because that will be easier for your child to button. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to grab your shirt that you're going to be using. I'm using this cute little button sandwich I got off of Etsy. I highly recommend these. They have nice big buttons on them. You can get them on Etsy if you type in button practice or button board. I'm sure you could get them on Amazon. And they're amazing practice for our kids who are learning how to button. If you don't have one of these, that's fine. Just grab a shirt. Ideally, it has bigger buttons. If not, make sure it's a shirt that has buttons that are a different color from the rest of the shirt so it's not as visually confusing. And we're first going to teach our children how to unbutton because that's easier. So I'm going to show you how to do it. So what I want you to do is I want you to sit behind your child and guide their hands. Okay, this will help them with the motor planning piece. So you're going to sit behind them. Your buttons are all going to be buttoned up, and you're going to instruct them to put their thumb on top using their preferred or dominant hand. And you're going to say, thumb on top, find mouth, this is the mouth, push and pull. Thumb on top, find mouth, push, pull. Again, and you want to make sure that you pass the button back to that dominant hand. So thumb on top, find mouth, push, pull. And you might have to teach your kid like where their thumb is. A lot of kids when they're young don't know that this is their thumb. So their thumb has to be on top. You can even put a sticker on your thumb, on their thumb. Thumb on top, find the mouth, push, pull. Thumb on top, find mouth, push, pull. If your kid grabs the button like this, which I can assure you they will, just make sure you emphasize, nope, the thumb goes on the top. If you don't have a sandwich, that's fine. Go ahead and use a shirt. Make sure all the buttons are buttoned up, and it's just going to be the exact same thing. So we're going to say thumb on top. It's much harder with smaller buttons. Thumb on top, find mouth, push, pull. Again, thumb on top, find mouth, push, pull. And that is how you teach your kiddo how to unbutton. Once they learn how to unbutton independently, then you can progress to buttoning. But what I want you to do is I want you to say the exact same verbal cues every single time they are unbuttoning. So thumb on mouth, thumb on button, find mouth, push through, pull. As your kid gets better and better, you can decrease the amount of verbal cues and see if they'll do it by themselves. And it would also be great if before you taught them how to button, if you could have them practice using smaller buttons to unbutton. So maybe you start with one of these and then you progress with a shirt. Again, to challenge their fine motor skills a little. So now that your child has mastered unbuttoning, they can do it all by themselves. They don't need any more verbal prompts. They don't need any tactile prompts. We're going to progress on to buttoning. So grab your buttoning board or your buttoning toy. If you don't have one, no big deal, grab your shirt. And again, we're gonna sit behind the child and we're gonna guide their hand movements. And we're pretty much gonna say the exact same thing that we said for unbuttoning, pretty much the same verbal cues. So we're gonna have the kiddo's hand start with their thumb on top. So their preferred hand has the thumb on top of the button. And we're gonna say, find mouth, here's the mouth, push, pull. And then we're gonna put it back in our dominant hand, thumb on top, find mouth, push, pull. And you can make this dynamic and fun. Like you can hide these pieces throughout your house and introduce a gross motor component. Have them run around and try to find the pieces of the sandwich. And again, thumb on top, find mouth, push, pull. Once they can do it with the big buttons, go ahead and increase the challenge. Have them practice with smaller buttons on a different shirt. Reduce the amount of verbal cues you give them. See if they can remember to keep their thumb on top. Once they have mastered unbuttoning and buttoning off of their body, then they can translate the skill onto their body. So that is how you teach buttoning. Super easy. The big takeaways are say the same exact verbal cues every single time. Guide their hand movements. Start with bigger buttons if you can so they don't get frustrated because smaller buttons are significantly harder. And make sure to praise your kiddo every time they do it the right way. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you all next time.